Greetings, I am Catherine II, alternatively recognized as Catherine the Great, and I am eager to unveil my tale to you. I was born on May 2, 1729, in the city of Stettin in Prussian Pomerania, which is now part of modern-day Poland. My mother, Joanna Elizabeth, was the daughter of Christian August of Holstein, Gottorp, who was the youngest son of Christian Albert, Duke of Holstein, Gottor, and his wife, the daughter of King Frederick III of Denmark, Princess Frederica Amalia. My father was Christian August, Prince of Anhalt-Zerbst, who gained prominence in Prussia as a military commander under King Frederick the Great. After a distinguished military career, he was honored as a Knight of the Order of the Black Eagle, Prussia's highest military order, and later rose to the rank of General Field Marshal in the Prussian army. I was born into the noble elite of Prussian society. Despite our family's titles, lineage, and military background, my parents were relatively poor. My path to power in Russia would later depend on the support of my mother and close family. Due to Prussia's rivalry with Austria, they sought a marriage alliance for me with my second cousin, Peter of Holstein, Gottorp, who was a contender to succeed Empress Elizabeth to the Russian throne. Empress Elizabeth remained unmarried and childless, and instead satisfied her desires through relationships with various commoners, including an army sergeant and several lowly serfs. Empress Elizabeth is also remembered for continuing the modernization efforts initiated by my father, Peter the Great. Under his rule, Russia transformed from a medieval feudal kingdom into a resurgent European power, reclaiming large portions of the Baltic coast from the Swedes, who had conquered Ingria over 100 years prior. Following Peter the Great's death in 1725, the Russian throne saw a succession of 4 Tsars within 16 years, including Peter's second wife, Catherine I, who passed away in 1727, and his grandson from his first marriage, Peter II, who died at the age of 14 in 1730. Anna, the daughter of Peter the Great's half-brother Ivan V, then ascended to the Russian throne and ruled until 1740. The infant Ivan VI, Ivan V's last surviving great-grandchild, briefly took the throne but was deposed by Elizabeth in 1741, who became the Empress. Some historians argue that the Russian Enlightenment began during the reign of my father, Peter the Great. However, it was Elizabeth's ascension that introduced the concept of enlightened absolutism, also known as benevolent despotism, to the Tsardom. This concept was first theorized by the Prussian King Friedrich the Great, who aimed to combine absolute monarchy with the new theories and philosophies of the Enlightenment. The Enlightenment was a significant period in 18th century Europe, during which scientists and philosophers began questioning the traditional assumptions of Western civilization using reason. This movement challenged the authority of the Catholic Church and the divine right claimed by absolute monarchies, giving way to more scientific, individualistic, and libertarian philosophies. These ideals ultimately paved the way for the rise of liberalism, socialism, and advancements in science. Naturally, many European rulers struggled to reconcile with these new ideas. However, some enlightened monarchs, like Frederick the Great, can be considered benevolent dictators. They embraced the concept of enlightened absolutism to maintain their power by promoting education for the upper and middle classes, religious tolerance, freedom of speech, and private property rights. Over the following decades, several European rulers, including Frederick the Great, Napoleon Bonaparte, and even myself, Catherine the Great, adopted benevolent despotism. Elizabeth, my predecessor, embraced the ideas and policies put forth by Frederick the Great. Her influence shaped my own rule as Catherine the Great as I continued to modernize Russia, earning respect and admiration as one of these are Demarche, most revered monarchs. As Elizabeth grew older, it became clear that she would not produce an heir. Consequently, she chose her nephew Charles Peter Ulrich of Schleswig-Holstein-Gottorf as her successor. He was the only surviving child of Elizabeth's elder sister Anna, who tragically passed away from a bacterial infection shortly after giving birth. Elizabeth's decision to pass the throne to her nephew was motivated by her fear of a potential coup in support of the deposed Ivan VI. Since his deposition, Ivan had been kept in solitary confinement, and Elizabeth instructed his jailer to eliminate him immediately if any escape or coup attempt were made. With the prospect of Peter becoming the new Tsar of Russia, he became the most eligible bachelor in Eastern Europe. Ultimately, it was the potential marriage alliance between Peter and myself, Sophie, that solidified our connection. Our family's ties to Prussia played a significant role in this union. The marriage had support from influential figures within the Prussian state, including Frederick the Great and one of Empress Elizabeth's top advisors, Jean-Armand de Lestock. They aimed to strengthen the bond between Prussia and Russia against Austria. However, these plans faced opposition from Elizabeth's chancellor, Alexei Bestuzhev, who advocated for a pro-Austrian and anti-Prussian foreign policy. According to accounts, Peter and I first met when I was 10 and he was 11, shortly after he became the Duke of Holstein, Gottorp following his father's death in 1739. However, it was not love at first sight for me, as I found Peter unappealing due to his complexion, drinking habits, and fondness for playing with toy soldiers. In 1742, at the age of 14, Peter moved to Russia, where his Aunt Elizabeth appointed him as the King of Finland. After Russia regained control of the country in the Russo-Swedish War, I, along with my mother, joined my future husband in Russia in 1744. During the following months, I immersed myself in Russian customs and quickly grew fond of my new home. Within a short period of time, I became fluent in Russian and gained the favor of Empress Elizabeth. However, my life was nearly cut short by an illness in 1744, which I later described as pleurisy, an inflammation of the lungs that almost took my life. I recovered fully with the help of bloodletting, allowing the preparations for my marriage to Peter to continue. Despite reservations from my parents, I was formally accepted into the Russian Orthodox Church on June 28, 1744. I was given the name Ekaterina or Catherine. A year later, on August 21, 1745, at the age of 16, I finally married Peter in the Russian capital of St. Petersburg. After the ceremony, Peter and I made our home in the Russian royal residence of Oranienbaum, located west of St. Petersburg, where we held court. However, our marriage was unhappy and distant. We disliked each other, and rumors spread that both of us had lovers and lived separate lives within the palace. Over the years, our dislike turned into hatred and suspicion. Peter became increasingly unpopular within the royal residence. He would drill his servants in the early morning and disturb my sleep with drunken singing when he burst into her room late at night. This led me to describe him as an idiot and a good-for-nothing drunkard from Holstein. Despite our mutual disdain, Peter and I managed to have at least one and possibly two children together in the following years. Our son, the future Emperor Paul I, was born in 1754, and our daughter, Anna, was born in 1757 but died in infancy. Peter, suspecting that the child was not his own, responded with harsh words when confronted with the baby's body, deeply hurting me and further fueling my hatred. Later, I claimed that she had never shared a bed with Peter at all, suggesting that all my children were illegitimate. However, there is no solid evidence to support this claim. In the years to come, I would have two more children, Alexei in 1762 and Elizabeth in 1775, both of whom were born from my various lovers. Then, on Christmas Eve of 1761, Empress Elizabeth suffered a severe stroke. Despite complaining of dizzy spells for some time, she had refused to take the medications prescribed by her physicians and had even forbidden the word death to be mentioned in her presence. However, her health rapidly deteriorated over the following weeks, and she passed away on January 5, 1762, at the age of 52. This was the day that both Peter and I had been eagerly waiting for. Shortly afterward, Peter was crowned Emperor of Russia, and I was given the title of Empress Consort. We moved from our residence in Oranienbaum to the Winter Palace in St. Petersburg. Despite ascending to the throne, Peter showed no signs of changing his ways, and his reign turned out to be unpopular and short-lived. Discontent against the new emperor first became evident when Peter decided to support Prussia's Frederick the Great. Despite his previous attempts to improve relations with Empress Elizabeth, Frederick found himself fighting against Russia in what is now known as the 7 Years' War. Prussia, along with its ally Great Britain, fought against France, Austria, the Russian Empire, Spain, Sweden, and others. Against all odds, Prussia emerged victorious. The turning point for Prussia in the 7 Years' War was Empress Elizabeth's death, as their war effort was in dire straits by that time, with the low point being the Russian sack of Berlin in October 1760. However, being born in the German city of Kiel, Peter greatly admired Frederick the Great. Just 2 months after ascending to the Russian throne, the new Tsar signed a peace treaty with Prussia and sent troops to aid Frederick the Great against his Austrian arch-enemies. This move effectively tipped the scales in Prussia's favor in Eastern Europe. Ultimately, Prussia secured Silesia in October 1762, forcing the Austrians to the negotiating table the following year. On February 15, 1763, the Treaty of Hubertusburg was signed, establishing Prussia as a major European power and laying the foundation for its future unification of Germany. Following this, Emperor Peter sought to extend Russia's influence over the Danish territory of Schleswig to bring it under the control of the neighboring Duchy of Holstein, Gottorp. Understandably alarmed by these events, the Danes threatened to annex the free city of Hamburg in northern Germany in order to secure loans from its banks and continue their fight. Peter saw this as the justification he needed and dispatched 45,000 Russian troops. However, the emperor never had the chance to seize Holstein. Events in Russia were about to take a turn as the country's nobility grew greatly discontented with Peter's rule, particularly his decision to ally with the Prussians against Austria. Oblivious to the hatred his court and nobility held for him, Peter left St. Petersburg in July 1762, accompanied by his German-born courtiers and relatives, for a short break at his former residence in Oranienbaum. However, I chose to stay behind. Over the 6 months since my husband's ascension, I had been plotting with Peter's Russian opponents to claim the throne for myself. Shortly after Peter's departure from St. Petersburg, I received news that one of my co-conspirators had been arrested. Determined, I crossed the capital and headed to the headquarters of the elite Izmailovsky Regiment of the Russian Army. There, I delivered a speech appealing for the soldiers' support and protection against my husband. Fortunately for me, instead of arresting me, the soldiers agreed to support my cause. I then proceeded to the nearby Semenovsky barracks, where an Orthodox clergyman was ready to formally proclaim me as the sole empress of the Russian Empire. Shortly thereafter, with the full backing of the Russian state and church, I officially assumed power and ordered my husband to be taken into captivity. Peter, who had been outmaneuvered, was finally taken prisoner on July 9, 1762. While in custody, he formally abdicated the throne before being transported to the Ropsha Palace outside of St. Petersburg. According to accounts, He was assassinated on July 17, allegedly by Grigory Orlov, the brother of my lover and favorite, Alexei Orlov, who played a crucial role in the coup. However, the exact circumstances of Peter's death remain uncertain, as it is unclear whether the act was carried out under orders or by Grigory's own initiative. Although my ascension to power was not universally celebrated, I faced opposition later in 1764 when a plot to release Ivan VI, who had been imprisoned by Empress Elizabeth, was foiled. Some historians question whether I was the official empress or merely acting as regent for my son Paul. There were even rumors of a coup in the 1770s to depose me and place my son on the throne instead. Nevertheless, after my husband's death, few dared to challenge my authority. On September 22, 1762, I was formally crowned as Empress of Russia at the Ascension Cathedral in Moscow. A new crown, known as the Russian Imperial Crown, was crafted for the occasion. It consisted of over 70 pearls and 5,000 Indian diamonds, adorning 2 gold and silver lobes representing the Eastern and Western Roman empires. In the center, a large ruby was mounted under a diamond-encrusted Orthodox cross. Following my coronation, I devoted myself to the affairs of the Russian state and initiated a program of reform and modernization. I was determined to make my empire a formidable contender among European powers, particularly in terms of economic strength, which heavily relied on the labor of cheap, low-skilled peasants or serfs. During the 18th century, the population of peasants, who had once been widespread across Europe, steadily declined. Russia was among the last countries to incorporate serfdom into its social order, where workers were given parcels of land to cultivate and paid a portion of their crops or livestock to their landlords. While I hesitated to fully abolish or reform serfdom, fearing the consequences of liberating the lower classes, I did grant serfs the right to lodge complaints against their landlords with the local governors, providing some measure of protection and rights for Russia's poorest. However, it is worth noting that my true motivation for implementing this grievance process was to avoid dealing with the serfs' complaints myself. My disregard for the poor is further evident in my decision to gift state-owned farms to the nobles, effectively turning their workforce into serfs overnight. I even reversed Peter the Great's proclamation that prevented the Orthodox Church from owning serfs. This action would later have significant consequences, leading to a large-scale revolt of serfs across Russia between 1773 and 1775. This rebellion, known as Pugachev's Rebellion, was sparked by the increasingly oppressive and strict rules imposed by the nobility. Yemelyan Pugachev, a former army officer, capitalized on the widespread unrest to establish an alternative movement. As the Empress of Russia, I faced a significant challenge when Pugachev, in the name of the late Tsar Peter III, outlawed serfdom in an attempt to gain support from the peasantry. This posed a threat to my government, the imperial administration, the power of the nobility, and even to myself, as we all relied on the labor of the peasants. However, this rebellion was short-lived. Pugachev was captured, tried, and executed in Moscow in January 1775, leading to the reversal of his reforms. This episode made it abundantly clear to me the limitations and potential dangers of abolishing serfdom. It also exposed the issues associated with having a large population of unskilled serfs in Russia. Our country's economy heavily depended on an abundance of cheap, unskilled labor from the ground up. This meant that there were relatively few skilled professions available, which were crucial for the modernization and competition with Western powers. To address this, I made the decision to supplement the unskilled Russian workforce by encouraging foreign migration, particularly of German farmers, to the fertile regions of my empire, especially around the Volga River basin. These skilled farmers, well versed in modern Western farming methods, played a crucial role in increasing agricultural output, particularly in the cultivation of crops like wheat and tobacco, as well as livestock farming. This, in turn, led to the growth of professions such as carpentry and ironworking. The policy of attracting skilled migrants proved to be fruitful, as during my reign, the Volga region became the agricultural center of the Russian economy. The prosperity of the Russian economy was further enhanced by other measures, including the introduction of paper money and the establishment of banks. Until then, the Russian state had heavily relied on metal currency. If gold, silver, and copper were in short supply, coins couldn't be minted, resulting in rapid price inflation due to metal scarcity. In addition to economic reforms, I undertook a comprehensive overhaul of the Russian education system, which had lagged behind our European rivals. To address this disparity, I established an education commission that transformed the education of our subjects from the ages of 5 to 15. These reforms, overseen by my trusted educational advisor, Ivan Betskoy, included the establishment of special institutions such as the Moscow Foundling Home and the Smolny Institute, a school for girls from noble and later middle-class backgrounds. I firmly believed in providing education for all children, regardless of gender, and later in my reign, these educational reforms were implemented across Russia. It is estimated that over 60,000 students passed through the state schools I established during my reign, which numbered around 550 across the provinces of Russia. The schools I established during my reign were quite different from modern schools. Playtime was strictly forbidden, as we prioritized a curriculum focused on mathematics, science, history, basic skills, and morals. Respect for the Empress was emphasized, and discipline was enforced rigorously. According to accounts, the classrooms were extremely cold, as it was believed that heat was detrimental to children's health and concentration. One flaw in my educational reforms was that many noble families outright refused to send their children to state schools. Additionally, lower middle-class families objected to the Western-style curriculum. Despite these challenges, it is widely recognized that I did improve and expand the Russian school system. However, it is true that I did not believe peasants should receive an education. I held the view that it was easier to control them if they remained ignorant. I even expressed this sentiment in a letter to an advisor, stating that plebeians should not be educated as they would become as knowledgeable as you or I. Given my apparent disdain for the lower classes, it is fair to say that my adoption of Enlightenment ideas was limited to cultural and scientific matters. I did not see an educated peasantry as desirable. Instead, I believed that an educated middle class and a strong industrial base would strengthen Russia against its rivals and, consequently, strengthen my position. One could argue that I was an enlightened modernizer as long as it served my own interests. The reforms that held a special place in my heart were my patronage of Russian arts and literature. One notable example is the Hermitage Museum in St. Petersburg, established in 1764, renowned for housing the largest collection of paintings in the world. Despite claiming not to be an expert, but merely a lover of the arts, I even tried my hand at creating my own works, including fictional stories, extensive memoirs, and comedies. My efforts earned praise from celebrated European writers and philosophers, such as Voltaire. I corresponded with him for nearly 15 years, and he bestowed upon me the title of the Star of the North. Although we never met in person, I mourned his death in 1778. Later, I acquired the majority of his book collection from his relatives, which is now housed in the National Library of Russia. Despite these reforms, I am perhaps best remembered today for my liberated personal life. Following my husband's death, I chose not to remarry and instead engaged in numerous love affairs throughout my reign. Despite differing accounts regarding my physical appearance, I used my position to captivate many young and ambitious men at court who sought my favor. One could even argue that my decision not to take a second husband was rooted in my desire to retain control over all state affairs. Evidence of this can be found in the fact that I did not maintain any of my lovers for long, often discarding them when I grew bored or encountered someone more intriguing. Despite this, I rewarded nearly all of my lovers once our relationship had ended with titles, lands, or lifelong pensions. In return, many of them performed favors for me. For instance, Grigory Potemkin, after his affair with me, had concluded, recommended a suitable replacement lover and later became a crucial figure in my regime, particularly during my wars against the Ottomans. Some speculate that I even married Potemkin, although there is no evidence to support this claim. What is certain is that during my reign, I enjoyed the company of as many as 22 different men spanning various ages and social backgrounds. They ranged from commoners to aristocrats, all of whom were generously rewarded for their nighttime endeavors with substantial sums of money, estates, and, in some cases, thousands of serfs. Among them were Alexander Dmitry Maninov, Peter Zavadovsky, Prince Zubov, and Grigory Orlov, with whom I had a son named Alexei. However, perhaps my most famous and significant lover was Stanislaw August Poniatowski, who some believe to be the true father of my deceased daughter, Anna. However, this claim is disputed. What cannot be denied is that indulging in physical pleasures was of great importance to me. I even collected erotic furniture and artworks during my lifetime. I possess tables with legs shaped like male genitalia, as well as other furniture adorned with both male and female genitalia carved into erotic patterns. My palaces were adorned with suggestive paintings and statues. Additionally, I had my potential lovers vetted or tested by my ladies in waiting, including Countess Praskovia Bruce, who spent a night with any gentleman who caught my eye, or vice versa. However, when the Countess became close to one of my recent lovers, I dismissed her from her position, as she had displeased me greatly. All of this paints a portrait of a woman who reveled in the pleasures and luxuries afforded by her position. Alongside being a competent and intelligent ruler, I was determined to savor every aspect of my life and reign, whether it be warfare, diplomacy, romance, or personal pleasures. The French author Charles-François Philibert Masson referred to me, stating that I had two passions that remained with me until my last breath: the love of men, which deteriorated into licentiousness, and the love of glory, which transformed into vanity. When my relationships ended, I also granted positions of power to my former lovers. The most prominent example, as mentioned before, was Stanislaw August Poniatowski. After our affair concluded, I supported his successful bid to become the new king of the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth following the death of King Augustus III in 1763. However, this raised concerns among figures like Frederick the Great, who feared that I intended to marry Poniatowski and establish a Polish-Russian union. I denied these claims and insisted that my newly appointed Polish puppet king should marry another woman instead. Poland and Lithuania had been a united kingdom for centuries, but its rulers did not possess absolute power over the kingdom. The government often struggled with indecision, and the nobles could be easily swayed by external powers to impede reforms and new legislation. This ultimately led to the kingdom, including its new king, falling under my influence. One of the foreign leaders who viewed the Commonwealth with envy was King Frederick the Great of Prussia. He harbored a deep disdain for the Slavs and particularly the Poles, once stating that those with surnames ending in "ski" deserved nothing but contempt. Frederick, along with other neighboring powers like Russia, had long been competing to gain greater influence over Poland. Over time, Catherine the Great, and Russia began exerting a particularly strong influence, as evidenced by Stanislaw August Poniatowski's ascent to the throne. Frederick, however, had long desired to incorporate Eastern Prussia into the Kingdom of Prussia and had consistently undermined Poland through various means. He printed Polish banknotes to devalue their currency and hindered Polish government reforms and modernization through bribery and threats. These policies eventually led to the first partition of Poland in 1772, in which Prussia, Austria, and Russia occupied various regions of Poland and Lithuania with their respective armies. This partition strengthened all three countries while weakening their neighbor, marking the beginning of the end for the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth. The kingdom would later be divided twice more in 1793 and 1795 after the initial partition. After the first partition, I sought to expand Russia's borders in other regions. Since engaging in war with major European neighbors was deemed unwise, I turned my attention to territorial gains in the south, which inevitably brought conflict with the powerful Ottoman Empire. Before pursuing aggressive expansion, I negotiated a trade agreement with Great Britain in 1766, but refrained from entering into a full military alliance. I feared that such an alliance would further elevate the already powerful island nation, considering its victory in the 7 Years' War. I calculated that close ties with Britain could potentially anger and isolate other major powers on the continent. Perhaps my reluctance to engage in war against Russia's Western rivals prompted me to shift focus to the south. Similar to the time of Peter the Great, Russia aimed to gain control over the Azov region in the Black Sea. However, my predecessor had failed to secure Russian dominance in the region. Therefore, as Empress, I sought to wrest control of the Black Sea ports from the Ottoman Empire, leading to what is now known as the First Russo-Turkish War. From 1768 to 1774, my armies engaged in a conflict with the Ottomans. During this time, we achieved a series of victories, including the naval Battle of Chesma that took place from the 5th to 7th of July, 1770, off the northern Anatolian coast. In this battle, the Russian fleet decimated the Ottoman navy, granting me near total control over the Black Sea and the Aegean. Our success continued on land in the Battle of Cagoule on the 21st of July, 1770. The Battle of Cagoule is widely regarded as one of the largest land battles of the 18th century. In this engagement, a Russian army of 40,000 men inflicted significant losses on an Ottoman and Crimean force nearly twice its size in Moldavia. Approximately 20,000 Muslims were killed, effectively bringing the majority of southern Ukraine under my control. While I had converted to the Russian Orthodox faith earlier, I did not practice it with great enthusiasm. In fact, I seized church property and even sold the belongings of the country's clergy and monasteries to fund my wars. However, I did protect the Orthodox religion by regulating the practice of other faiths, such as Catholicism and Islam. I offered financial incentives to foreigners to convert to the Orthodox faith when immigrating to Russia. My policies toward Jews, however, differed significantly from my approach to other religions. Though the Jewish population in Russia was initially small, in 1772, I, along with Maria Theresa of Austria, agreed to Frederick the Great of Prussia's plan to seize land from the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth. This decision resulted in hundreds of thousands of Jews becoming part of the Russian population. I allowed them to live as separate entities within Russian society, independent of the church, in exchange for higher taxes. Those who converted to Orthodox Christianity were exempt from these taxes and could join the mercantile classes as free citizens. However, these policies were unpopular with my other subjects, leading me to ban Jews from Moscow's middle classes in 1790. While these measures may be seen as anti-Semitic today, it is worth noting that Jews fared similarly to other religious groups under my rule. However, any group that posed a potential challenge to my authority, whether the church or the peasantry, was suppressed. On the other hand, the nobility and middle classes received protection, as they were crucial for tax income and occupied positions as ministers of state and army officers. To me, science held greater value than religion ever could. I also encouraged the immigration of numerous scientists to Russia, including botanists, mathematicians, and astronomers. Among them was Anders Johann Lexell, who, upon moving to St. Petersburg and joining the state-funded Academy of Science, made significant contributions to the field of celestial mechanics and even had a comet named after him. I was a patron of science and also sought to incorporate Enlightenment principles into Russia's governance. In 1766, I established a Grand Commission in Moscow, comprising around 650 members from various levels of Russian society, including government officials, nobility, middle class, and even peasants. The purpose of this body was to identify and address issues while ensuring it did not exceed its mandate. I also issued a set of instructions for the Commission to govern in alignment with Enlightenment philosophies and ideas. However, it soon became apparent to both the Russian nobility and myself that this body had the potential to introduce democratic governance, which led to its eventual dissolution. Despite this setback, I did carry out several governmental and legal reforms in Russia. I established provinces and districts across the country and curtailed the power of the nobility through the issuance of the Charter of Towns in 1785. This charter divided the population into 6 social groups, creating a new upper middle class to counterbalance the influence of the nobility. These reforms extended to various sectors, including sea trade and policing. Around this time, the possibility of war with the Ottomans emerged once again. In the Second Russo-Turkish War, the Ottoman Empire sought to reclaim territories it had lost to me. However, my army emerged victorious, seizing control of Crimea. Shortly after, I concluded a peace treaty with the Ottomans. It was during this conflict that my cousin Gustav III of Sweden saw an opportunity to attack Russia from the north due to domestic discontent in Sweden. In June 1788, he launched an assault on Russia along the Baltic coast with the aim of reaching St. Petersburg. Yet the Russian Baltic Fleet defeated the Swedish forces in the Battle of Hoagland on July 17, 1788, foiling Gustav's plans for aiding. Similarly, the Battle of Svensksund in July 1790 prevented any Russian advances, resulting in a peace treaty between both sides in August 1790. Encouraged by these successes, my final military endeavor would be the war against Persia, known as the Persian Expedition of 1796. It began after the Muslim kingdom, led by Aga Muhammad Khan, invaded Georgia, Russia's neighboring country, the previous year. As I had pledged to protect Georgia from foreign aggression, I ordered my forces to march against the Muslim invaders. Many people in Russia expected the Persian expedition to be led by the experienced commander Ivan Gudovich. However, I made the surprising choice of Count Valerian Zubov, a young and inexperienced officer who was the brother of my lover, Platon Zubov. Valerian quickly pushed the Turks back into what is now Iran. Despite his successes and my high regard for his brother, Valerian's fortunes changed when my son Paul ascended to the throne after my death. During this time, my views on enlightened absolutism began to shift. Like many European monarchs, I witnessed the unfolding events of the French Revolution of 1789 with apprehension. There were fears that the revolutionary ideals could spread across Europe and lead to the downfall of royal dynasties. My growing discontent with Enlightenment philosophies was further fueled by developments in the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth. In 1791, the May Constitution was enacted, aiming to establish a constitutional monarchy and grant social equality to the Polish nobility and townspeople while providing government support to the peasantry. This effectively ended serfdom and posed a threat to the social order in Russia. Consequently, I decided to invade Poland in 1792 and later agreed to the final partition of Poland between Russia and Austria in 1795, eliminating the once proud Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth from the map of Europe. In the later years of my reign, I sought to mediate in the conflicts of my European neighbors by establishing the League of Armed Neutrality. This coalition of European countries aimed to protect neutral shipping from the British Royal Navy during the American Revolutionary War. As the British were seizing merchant ships of nations they believed were aiding the French, who were allied with the rebellious 13 colonies, I endeavored to strengthen ties with the new Swedish king, Gustav IV Adolf, during his visit to St. Petersburg in autumn 1796. I even attempted to arrange a marriage between Gustav and my granddaughter Alexandra, with the hope of seeing her become the Queen of Sweden. Initially, things seemed to be progressing well, and a royal ball was planned for September 11, 1796, where Gustav and Alexandra's engagement was to be announced. However, much to my dismay, the Swedish king did not attend the festivities. He left for Stockholm, feeling aggrieved that Alexandra would not convert to the Protestant Lutheran faith. I was deeply offended by this snub, and it significantly impacted my health. Nevertheless, I gradually recovered over the following weeks and began making arrangements to name my favorite grandson, Alexander, son of Paul, as my successor. Although I had a biological heir in Paul, my regard for him was not much higher than that of his father. Therefore, late in my reign, I decided to disinherit Paul in favor of my grandson. Unfortunately, these plans were never realized. On November 16, 1796, I woke up from a restful night's sleep, but collapsed from a severe stroke shortly after breakfast, while sitting on my commode. I was found unconscious on the floor of my chambers by my servants, barely clinging to life. Shortly after the stroke was diagnosed by the attending doctor, I was put to bed. Despite the doctor's efforts, I slipped into a coma and passed away the following evening on November 17, 1796, at the Winter Palace in St. Petersburg at the age of 67. In the following days, an autopsy was conducted, confirming that my cause of death was indeed a cerebral hemorrhage. However, rumors regarding my demise started circulating, including one suggesting that I met my end while engaging in inappropriate activities with a horse when the harness holding the horse above me broke, causing it to crush me. Another outlandish tale claimed that I was killed by hidden spring-loaded blades in my toilet seat that were triggered when I sat down. Historians unanimously agree that these accounts are highly imaginative and far from the truth. In reality, I was laid to rest wearing a silver brocade dress and a golden crown in the Peter and Paul Cathedral in St. Petersburg. Despite my wishes, my son Paul succeeded me and became Paul I of Russia. However, in a twist of fate, Paul himself was assassinated in March of 1801 at the age of 46, and he was succeeded by his son, Alexander, who happened to be my favorite grandson. Alexander would go on to become one of Russia's revered Tsars, leading the country to victory during Napoleon Bonaparte's invasion in 1812. Although I was not Russian by birth, I am widely recognized as one of Russia's most accomplished and respected rulers. Through my introduction of Enlightenment ideas implementation of reforms in governance, social changes, administrative improvements, and victories against neighboring rivals, I left an indelible mark on the Russian Empire. I am among the few women in history to be granted the title of great. Even as a foreigner, I was widely respected and admired by the Russian people, a sentiment that continues from the time of my death through the Soviet era to the present day. By the time I passed away, I had transformed Russia into a more powerful nation than it had ever been before.